This account was discovered on a laptop that was found along 36 Highway, near Macon, Missouri. It is one of over a dozen entries left by Calvin Bruce, a former St. Louis police sergeant who went missing in 2021. Bruce served with distinction, earning commendations for valor, merit, and community engagement. He was also the recipient of a captain's letter of accommodation, and according to this researcher's efforts, was known as an honorable man, even after he lost his position with the department. Addendum: I have done an exhaustive search of both the internet and the Missouri Secretary of State records specifically, and I found zero evidence of a town called Shady Oaks anywhere in the state. There is no city, town, or unincorporated community anywhere near the city of Buckland, as Bruce indicated in his first log. Furthermore, I've driven to the area in question, and there is no perpendicular road before the turnoff into Buckland. Aside from the logs found on the laptop, zero evidence of his whereabouts was ever found on that stretch of 36 Highway. He just vanished. Addendum 2. I investigated some of Bruce's cases and found at least 20 individuals over the course of his career who have actively threatened, on record, to kill him. That's to say nothing of all the anonymous threats that he's received. It's no wonder he chose not to have a family. They just have been in constant danger. Can't imagine worrying about that on a daily basis. If these logs of his are real, then perhaps he was drugged, kidnapped, and taken into some kind of simulation, or elaborate theater of some kind. It's a stretch, but in his initial log entry, he himself seemed concerned that whoever had lured him out to Shady Oaks might have been someone he had arrested, or at least connected to his cases in some way. It would explain the why of how he has so completely disappeared, but still not the how. And it doesn't explain how the laptop wound up just laying on the side of the highway. All of it is really just bizarre. April 16, 2021. Third log entry of Calvin Bruce, Chief of Police, Shady Oaks. So first, I've gotten more of my bearings in town and learned that while a lot of folks are right here in or around the square, there are some others who are more spread out. There are several owners who live further from town proper and only come into the square to trade and resupply. Why or even how someone might choose to live in Shady Oaks in such a way is beyond my ken. But after meeting one of them, I've made it a point to get to know these people. That is, if I can. As an update from my last log, I've gotten the station house in order and tidied up. My predecessor wasn't as much for keeping logs as me, or keeping house, but he seems to have been a prolific note-taker. His desk was full of post-its and scraps of paper that I'm still going over and trying to piece together. As they stand, they're just a jumble of odd random thoughts. For example, one, which was stuck to a lamp, reads simply, Wayne, vampires? Which in Shady Oaks makes as much sense as anything else. I found out that the entire second floor is taken up by a records room with a small clerk's desk at the front. And while the cases might make for interesting or even enlightening reading in the evenings, what caught my eye was what I found on the desk. Someone, likely the old chief, had been trying to cobble together an old ham radio from spare parts, some of which were from walkie-talkies that had been dismantled. Now, I don't know much about radios, especially radios of that type, but I knew that while it was illegal, you could transmit and receive on police frequencies using them. You can also use them to listen to most other radio frequencies, which was half the reason why so many people had them in the 80s. I don't know what my predecessor was planning, but I bet it had to do with either communicating with everyone in town at once, or getting the hell out of town. Both were worthy, if not lofty, goals. I still haven't gotten into the rifle cage, but it wasn't for lack of trying. The rifle in there is a Winchester, and I want it, but I'm either going to have to wait until I find the key to the cage, or a blowtorch. Those cages are notoriously difficult to break into, and for now I've got my Remington and my Glock, though I've recently learned that ammunition in general is a commodity here, like a big one. Apparently there's a guy in town who can reload, but most folks tend to just do their best to stay out of trouble and avoid needing ammo, which is always a good idea. Most citizens are also ready and willing to donate ammo to me if I need it, but I'd rather do my best not to need any either. But still, it's nice to know that this community supports its local constable. Caitlin has reported no further chicken deaths or thefts, and has also not found the pig that went missing around the same time. I did not elaborate on the subject to Wilbur to her any more than to say that I did not find him, and wasn't really trained to track pigs through the woods. But I can't genuinely bring myself to go after the guy, and I don't give a fuck how that sounds. Wilbur's a buddy, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm not going to run him down or jam him up if I can avoid it. Caitlin was still really grateful about me ridding her of the things attacking her farm that she seems to have let it drop there, thankfully. And speaking of those creatures, I went and spoke to Adam, the town clerk, about them, and he told me that I needed to speak to Lafa Rendell, which is how I found out about all of the outskirters. He told me that she lived in a cabin just on the outskirts of the town proper, and that she knew the most about the local fauna, and so I decided to go pay her a visit that afternoon. In other news, I made my first appearance at Milton's Corner Cafe the other day, and met its namesake. Milton is a nervous guy, but friendly, and a pretty good cook. There are a few others there as well, as it was around lunchtime, so I introduced myself and told the tale of how I came to be in Shady Oaks. There was little surprise from anyone there, just nods of affirmation and advice from one older guy telling me that them hissers, as he called the thing that almost killed me, like to ambush from the trees, which I already knew, but the concern was appreciated. The food was decent, especially considering the situation in town, and I enjoyed my mushroom omelet with beans and fried potatoes, even though there was no salt or cheese. I've gotten to know a few other folks in town as well. I talked to Lenny the grocer again, and he's a lot more chill during the day. I tried to pay him for a bag of pumpkin seeds, but he explained that they kind of use a barter system, which wasn't surprising, then told me just to take them. He said everybody already owed me for sorting the chickens out. I didn't argue, mostly because I didn't have much I was willing to trade for them. I asked what most people traded, which was how I found out about the ammo situation. He also told me that aside from essentials like food, toiletry, and medical supplies, the one thing everybody was after was books and games. Anything you could do inside, after dark, by candlelight. I asked after Wanda as well, but Lenny told me that she lived on the other side of town and kept to herself. I was a little surprised, because I had thought they were friends, but he told me that she'd only ever come in for food and didn't talk very much. I asked him why, if she was already from Shady Oaks, would she be out on the road if she knew what would happen. He just told me that people do crazy things sometimes, if they get desperate enough. I still need to talk to her, but when I went by the residence Lenny claimed that was hers, no one answered the door, and I even did the special knock. At any rate, I also finally got to meet Rena properly when I stopped by the tailor's shop to ask about getting some new clothes and cleaning the ones that I had. I had brought about 2 days' worth of outfits with me when I first came out to Shady Oaks, not counting backup underwear, and I had already gone through them. She was really sweet and told me that the laundromat was in operation, and that's where most folks wash their clothes. Rena is a very sweet and classy lady, if a bit pushy. She made a big deal about getting my measurements and wrote them down in a book that apparently had everyone else in town's sizes as well. It was fun having her hands all over me, but it also didn't feel particularly flirtatious, which is probably for the best. She's also a warrior, which I didn't need before I got trapped in a crazy monster-riddled town, cut off from the rest of the world, and I certainly don't need it now. Anyway, that was what I did on the morning of my second day here. Got to knock my way around town, met a few folks, got my face seen, and generally made my presence known. I figured that if these folks want me to be the new chief of police, they better learn what I look like, and I better get to know their faces as well. As for the afternoon, I decided to go meet this Ilafa Rendell and see if she knew anything about the spider creatures I'd exterminated. I want to know whether I needed to worry about them coming back, or if I had to find some kind of nest. Now, truth be told, I was also kind of worried about whatever venom or toxin they'd hit me with. I mean, I felt fine, but who knows what kind of long-term effects there could be. Even though Rendell still technically lived inside of town, I still took my whole kit with me. After everything I've seen so far, I'm not going anywhere without my shotgun, but I keep it slung with the muzzle down. Oddly, no one seems bothered by its presence in the slightest, but again, most people in Shady Oaks carry, and make no bones about doing so. Maybe it's just something I'll have to get used to. The walk out to Ilafa's house was more like a hike. When Adam told me that she lived on the outskirts of town, man, he wasn't kidding. She was a ways southwest, down on an old lane called Quartz Avenue. She'd apparently been living there for as long as anyone can remember. Ilafa was a loner, and several of the folks I'd talked to her about said she was actually pretty weird, which in my experience tends to mean interesting. I noticed when I turned off into Quartz that there were a lot fewer houses and that they were spread out a little further apart. A lot of them were also boarded up or had broken windows. Both were indicators of abandonment, even in Shady Oaks. Most folks in town either had shutters on the outside of lower windows or bars. I'd even see one house that had a patch of chain-link fence tacked to it. But I hadn't seen anyone living in a completely boarded-up house, and no one ever left any portal completely open. Ever. I spotted the steel mailbox with the address 369 that Adam had described as Ilafa's, but my attention was pulled to one of the dilapidated houses across the street. I was sure that I had detected movement from one of the broken upper windows, but when I looked, there was nothing. Rather than brush it off, I stood and stared at the house and gripped my shotgun to be ready to bring it right up. After what felt like a little too long without any movement, I proceeded cautiously to the short trail that led to Lafa's cabin. As I turned onto the path, I was immediately aware of the smell of something cooking ahead of me, and it smelled good, but also weird. There was a really strange and familiar smell coming from the cabin, which I knew wasn't a smell that should be near food, but it enhanced the aroma of whatever was cooking regardless. As I approached the cabin, I noted that the main door was wide open, and a light wisp of smoke came out of it. I immediately went for my Remington and I got it ready, but kept it pointed to the ground, then called out to Lafa, or whoever might be inside. I went through all the regular police stuff, instructing anyone within, or without, to declare themselves, or make themselves known, but there was no response. And after a quick look around outside to make sure there wasn't anyone or anything hanging about, I stepped the old cobblestone steps up into the cabin. The inside was simple, quaint, and, well, weird. It kind of reminded me of a call I went on, where I had to handle a dispute between two neighbors, both very religious. One was Muslim, and the other was, well, she was a witch. The Muslim lady didn't understand that practicing witchcraft wasn't illegal, and wanted me to arrest her neighbor. But in her defense, her neighbor's house was creepy as shit. The first thing I noticed, aside from all the dried plants hanging from the rafters and walls, was a little wrought iron wood fire stove, which was lit. There was a pot of food on top of it, which was the source of the distinct smell. But it had been left unattended and was burning. I grabbed a nearby rag and took the pot off of the burner, then closed the oven so the cabin wouldn't burn down. As the pot came closer to me, I got a good whiff of the food in it, which still smelled good, but was also setting off alarm bells in my head, and I didn't know why. Until it hit me. It was belladonna, otherwise known as deadly nightshade. I'd become familiar with it during a case where a woman poisoned her husband for the insurance money. It had kind of an odd and rank smell, as I recall, but I'd never smelled it cooked before. The main question on my mind now was why the hell was Ilafa making food that was obviously poisoned? I went back outside and checked back behind the cabin, where there was kind of a little shack next to some stacked firewood. I called out again, but nobody responded, so I moved over towards the entrance, but hesitated when I saw a spatter of blood on the floor. My gun went up in front of me, and I pulled out my flashlight to shine it inside. The whole inside of the shack was kind of covered in viscera and other guts, with a sharp-looking knife laying on a table where a carcass was laid out. As I looked up, I spotted more corpses hanging from the ceiling. It appeared that Miss Randell was a hunter and did her own butchering, as the bodies of deer and several rabbits could attest to. I didn't remember seeing a rifle or any other weapon in the cabin, so it was safe to assume that she still had it on her, which was relieving and also worrying at the same time. Or maybe this is what the nightshade was for. I headed back out to the front of the cabin, and just as I was about to head back to the square and come back later, something caught my eye. It was a distinct indentation in the rough dirt yard outside the cabin. The mud on the path closer to Quartz Avenue had a big gash in it, just about the size and shape of a boot heel, and it was dug in deep. Right next to that one was another, and another, all only the back edge of the heel, and all facing the cabin. It was a pattern that I knew well. Someone had been dragged down that path towards the road, kicking and likely screaming. I bolted from the cabin grounds and out into the street, looking around frantically in every direction. It was a minute before I realized that I'd gone into full-on cop mode and was looking for vehicles and license plates, which was pointless. I needed to remember where I was. Things in Shady Oaks were simultaneously less obvious, more elusive, but also sometimes dead simple. My attention turned to the house across the street, where I'd seen movement earlier. When I looked at that house, I got the distinct impression of something hidden. Furtive, if you will. Something or someone over at that house knew I was there, and didn't want me to know they were inside. I just knew it. Hell, call it a hunch, call it intuition. I honestly don't know what it is, but I've learned to listen to it. I walked casually over to the overgrown yard of the house across the street, my gaze down at the rough broken concrete path which led to the front porch. I was looking for more signs of whoever had been dragged from Elafa's, and spotted some red-colored hair, which looked a little fresh. The minute I saw it, I abandoned all pretense and moved with purpose to the front door of the obviously abandoned house to try the door, but it was locked. While I still had most of my kit, I lost my pocket knife, which pisses me off still, because it was a $200 Benchmade. But I wasn't traipsing off into the demon woods just for a knife, no matter how nice it was. Fortunately, Caitlin had my back, and when I told her I lost mine, she gave me this really old but well cared for folding buck knife. It wasn't as handy as the kinds of pocket carries I tend to like, but I was glad to have it all the same. I opened the buck and used it to force my way into the domicile. It felt a little odd, but it also wasn't the first time I'd had to gain entry into a building this way. I figured no one really lived there, and if anyone was inside, well, they were about to meet their new chief of police. I thought about calling out, but realized again, that was not a good idea here. If shit was jumping out of the trees to kill me, what would I find in a closet? I attached my secret flashlight onto the clip for it on my shotgun and began the nervy task of clearing the house. The vibe was early 1990s suburbia, but it was rotten with mildew and another odd smell I couldn't identify. I cleared the first floor, which was just a couple of big rooms, pretty quickly, then stopped by the stairs to the second floor. There was also a staircase with no door, which led down into a basement, and I was in the inevitable position of having to choose between a nope sandwich and some aha stew. Fortunately for me, my decision was made for me when I heard what sounded like something grunting and retreating away from the steps. Honestly, scared the hell out of me, because it didn't sound at all human. More like a pug with a vocoder in its gullet. I moved upstairs following the sound, and cleared 2 more bedrooms and a rather gross bathroom. Most of the doors upstairs were open, except for one at the end of the hall, which is what I can only describe as conspicuously shut. I moved over to the door cautiously and tried it. It was locked. I ground my teeth and shook my head, knowing that I was about to kick open a big box of hell. I called out to whoever was in there to declare themselves, but the only response I got was a faint whimper. Now at this point I'd had enough. I kicked the door in and pushed forward, shotgun leading the way. The door slammed open, rebounded off the wall, revealing a very, very strange scene. Inside the room were a couple of 3-foot-tall, oddly stocky dwarves, wearing brown and black hooded robes. Between them was a woman of about 45 with red hair, with streaks of white and gray. She was gagged and knelt down, with her hands bound in the front, between her legs. On the floor beneath her was a bizarre and elaborate symbol of various characters and lettering. And for a moment, no one moved. Not even me, because I was so floored by what I was seeing, but my eyes found their way to the poor woman's. Her expression was one of confusion and hope, both mixed with fear, and it made me furious. I turned my weapon on the nearest of the dwarves, or started to, but that little fucker surged forward so fast, too fast. Now, impossibly fast. I didn't even have time to aim before it was on me, biting and clawing at my leg. Now again, I'm not going to lie, I screamed at the top of my lungs when this thing came at me, and in a panic, I smashed it with the top of the head with the walnut stock of my Remington. It snorted and fell backwards onto the floor, but its 2 buddies came squealing right after. One of them grabbed at my other leg, while the other grabbed at the gun. Now I've had guys go for my gun before, usually my sidearm, and I'd never even came close to losing grip on my weapon. Until that moment. Whatever these things were, they were strong. It ripped the gun right out of my hands, but to my surprise and relief, rather than attempting to turn it on me, the creature just threw it across the room, where it slammed into the wall, leaving a hole. The little shit on my leg broke through my jeans with either its claws or its teeth. I couldn't tell which, and at that point, the training took over. The minute I lost my shotgun, my hand dropped immediately to my sidearm and my waistband. I managed to get it out, but the thing that had thrown my shotgun away leaned in and bit the forearm of my gun hand. I roared a far more manly scream and tried to shake it off, but it was also like a vice with little teeth that clamped onto my arm. It was then that I finally got a clear look at this thing, and it definitely was not human, but it wasn't an animal either. Its face reminded me of that weird cat from those Alice in Wonderland movies. See, it had this awful, twisted, really sickening grin, and its mouth was filled with tiny shell-like teeth. Like a dolphin's, I guess. Anyway, its eyes were the worst, jet black, like beads of water on a darkened window. I know that if it weren't tearing into my arm, I'd have been mesmerized, but I wasn't. Instead of trying to get the gun aimed at the one biting that arm, I just shifted my aim slightly and shot the one clawing at my leg. It wasn't a kill shot, but it got the thing off me. Its friend dying didn't faze the one that had me, nor did the sound of my Glock firing right next to its head. So I reached for my knife with my free hand, pinching the blade with my finger and my thumb, and snapped it out. I've only ever stabbed anyone once, and it was in a pretty dire situation. This situation was only a little worse. I let the blade of the buck slide down my fingers, then grabbed the knife smoothly by the handle and drove it right into this grotesque creature's chest under my arm. It screeched and fell back, releasing me, and I ripped my knife out of it as it went. I was going to raise my pistol to finish it, but two things happened to prevent that. The first was that the bound woman had already scrambled to the top of it and was groping at it like she was looking for something. The second was that the other one, the one I'd bonked on the head with my shotgun before it went across the room, was back on his feet and running at me. Again, the thing was just so fast, and my gun hand was bleeding pretty nasty from where I'd been hit, so I knew I was moving slow. I thought for a second that I'd have to resort to the knife again, but then something insane happened. Right as it was within inches of me, and my Glock was uselessly pointed at the floor, the little gremlin came up short as he was lifted into the air. The woman who'd been bound inside whatever screwed up ritual circle these things had drawn held the snarling dwarf in the air with both hands. She glared at the creature just for a moment, and when it realized what was happening, its grin turned into a look of utter horror as the woman roared and threw it straight out of an already half-broken window to finish the job. Hell, I heard the squeal as it fell out of sight, and then the smack as it hit something hard outside. But I managed not to laugh. I heard a snort from the corner and realized that the one I'd stabbed was still alive. I turned just as it had gotten to its feet, and before it could go after either of us, I shot it 3 times, center mass, and it collapsed into a heap in the corner. The silver cuffs the woman had been bound with laid on the floor, next to a silver key that matched them. For a moment, the only sound I could hear was both of our labored breaths. I leaned against the wall and took a look at my arm, which was pretty nasty. I looked up from my wound to the woman, who I could only assume was La Farendelle, to see if she was injured, which she didn't seem to be. It was only then that I noticed she was wearing clothes that looked like they were made of animal furs, which I guess wasn't that strange, considering everything else. I started to say something to her, but I cut it short and almost brought my gun up at her when I realized that she was coming right at me. She was on me before I could react, but rather than grabbing me, she cupped my face with her hands and pressed her lips hard into mine. I let her kiss me, both because I knew she was probably freaking out, and, well, it was pretty nice. I'm blushing a little. Anyway, for the record, I am aware that there are a lot of regulations about this kind of thing. However, they varied from department to department, and since I hadn't written any for my department, and since my department was pretty much just me, I decided to let myself off with a warning. She was pretty intense too, and I got the impression that if I pulled away at all, I'd piss her off, which again was not on a high list of things to do just then. The woman who I kind of hoped was Elafa Rendell pulled her lips away from mine, let out a moan of pain, and doubled over in what looked like a lot of pain. I thought she'd been injured and tried to catch her, but she shrugged me off and tore ass out of the door I'd just come through. She was down the hall and halfway down the stairs before I could even begin to move. I pushed myself off of the wall and moved to follow her, but then cursed and turned back to grab my shotgun. After holstering my pistol, I turned around and noticed the screwed up ritual symbol and decided to quickly pop out my phone to take a couple of pictures of it. I then ran down the stairs and outside to run back over to Lafa's cabin. On my way there, I saw the dead body of the thrown dwarf, who had landed hard on the concrete path. I kicked it as I passed it, and it didn't move. When I got back to Lafa's, I spotted her running inside her cabin, still holding her sides. I ran after her, thinking of administering first aid, but when I got inside, she had scooped up a bowl of the belladonna soup I'd taken off the burner earlier. She was scraping out some burnt bits out of it, and I suddenly realized that she had planned on eating it. Before I could say a word to stop her, Elafa drank a huge gulp from the bowl and swallowed, but rather than get sick, she seemed to relax. Her posture straightened, and she stopped holding her sides. But then I watched her eyes, shift. See, at first they seemed almost yellow, but then she blinked, shook her head, and when she looked up at me, they were a rather lovely shade of hazel. I'm honestly still not sure whether I imagined it, but I'm pretty sure that I didn't. "Who are you?" were the first words that she spoke to me, and I remember feeling pretty pleased with myself because she sounded really impressed, or at least grateful. I'm your new chief of police," I told her, but rather than being nonplussed or even pleased, she just chuckled at me and then downed the rest of the soup in the bowl. I couldn't believe she was still standing. I confirmed that she was Lafa, and that the cabin was hers, but when I asked her about the nightshade, she told me that I didn't know what I was talking about, to which I shrugged because her not being dead kinda confirmed that perhaps I did not. "What the hell were those things, and what were they trying to do to you?" I asked seriously as she dipped the bowl in to get a bit more of the weird stew. "Fucking Puckwudgies," Elafa spat as she slammed the bowl on her oaken table. "They've been trying for me for years, but they've gotten bolder lately." She paused to take another sip of the soup, then looked down at where I'd been bitten and almost spit. "Oh shit, your arm." She put the bowl down and went over to the shelf where there was a basket filled with what looked like cloth bandages and a few jars filled with a brown liquid. She then pulled me over to a chair and sat me down in it and started checking my wounds. "What are you doing out here anyway?" she asked as she applied the liquid to my wound. When I told her it was to introduce myself, she just chuckled again, like she knew that I was full of shit, which I only half was. I started to explain about my other reasons, but she cut me off when I mentioned the spiders. "Wait, you got bit by one of them ticks? And you're still standing?" Alafa asked incredulously with a short whistle. "Whew. You're made of some stern stuff, I guess." Now, I was then, and I still am as I write this, pretty horrified that those creatures were ticks. But in hindsight, spiders don't tend to explode into a bloody mess when they die. I asked her if I needed to worry about any long-term effects, and she told me that she'd only met a few people who survived being attacked by them, and they didn't have any adverse effects. Now, we made small talk while Ilafa finished clearing the bite on my arm with what she explained was a mixture of oak bark and witch hazel. She also applied some to the cut on my neck from the other day with the aforementioned ticks. She then wrapped my arm up with one of those cloth bandages and told me to have Lenny look at it when I got back to town. And I told her I would. I decided to ask her about what was going on with the Puckwudgies, or whatever they were called, and when she let go of my arm and got up, I knew I'd made a mistake. She told me that they were just gremlins that had been causing her trouble for years now, and she'd gotten used to it. When she didn't elaborate any further, and kind of started cleaning up the cabin, I knew it was time for me to go. I told her it was nice to meet her and to have a good day. Then I got up to leave. "I bet those little shits will think twice from now on, though," Alafa remarked as I made it to her doorway. "Very much obliged, Chief." Her tone was sincere, and the look in her eyes was one of genuine gratitude. I smirked back at her, nodded, and just told her that's what I was there for. And for the first time since arriving in Shady Oaks, I started to believe it.